the biggest threat to America is not Al-Qaeda, it's not ISIS, it's not Putin, it's not any of these guys, it's China. You really believe that?
I believe it. I think it's the most consequential, existential threat. From 2011 to 2013, they poured more concrete than we did in the entire 20th century.
Is that a factual statement?
That's a factual statement. They had 100 years of bad luck and now they're back on top. They are still, in their minds, perfecting their ability to control people. At any moment, this thing could become unraveled.
Who are you more concerned about, the totalitarian regime or the large technology company?
Today, they have the same business model.
Really? You're talking about having to change a lot of things for us to move forward.
No. What you can criticize is the policies of the government that allowed for the behavior to occur in the first place.
That's a strong statement, Stuart. You're saying you're guaranteeing China and Russia's in our network.
I guarantee it, particularly because you put out that video on China. Not only can you not opt out, you don't know who owns the data. Everything that you do can be watched.
Is it political? To me, it's not political.
It's not about quid pro quo. It's about adopting Xi Jinping's worldview. There is terabytes and terabytes of data that's created about you, and you have no control over it.
All right, today I have a special guest with me here. Obviously, we did a China video a couple weeks ago that got a few million views on a lot of content, so I wanted to go a little bit deeper. We reached out to General Robert Spalding, who wrote a book called Stealth War: How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. I literally couldn't put this book down, and once you read it as well, we'll put the link below, you'll know exactly why. He was the former Senior Director of Strategy at the National Security Council, and he was kind enough to fly out to Dallas for us to have this conversation together about US, China, 5G, and a lot of other technical issues that have to do with that. Having said that, thanks for coming out. Appreciate you for making the time.
Thanks for having me. Great
yes,
to be here.
So let's get right into it. So going into China, what is your journey of you becoming a general at the Air Force, and then from there being part of National Security Council? How did that go about?
I came into the Air Force before I really knew much about the military, and my picture of the military was about peeling potatoes and somebody yelling at you, essentially Gomer Pyle. And I saw the movie Top Gun, and it fascinated me and really got me excited. So I joined and just went in with no expectations, just had fun and really just worked hard, but also played hard. But I wanted to fly jets, and that was what got me started. And one thing led to another. I had an opportunity 2 years before I was supposed to leave the service to go live in China, and so I took it. And the rest is kind of history, because when I made that fateful decision, and it was really about thinking about what opportunity I had to go live abroad, but also how strategic China was in our future. It really opened doors for me that, quite frankly, I would have never considered. I even had no clue about. So
there was no plans of that happening?
There was no plans. There was really no plans. In fact, I didn't want a career in the Air Force, so I didn't look to become a general. In fact, when my wife heard that I had made it, she laughed.
Why is that? That you made it as a general?
Like, how could you make that?
Because
that
for
rank?
me, I was an E4 in the military, in the Army. When we saw generals, we would shiver. It's like, this is a general,
Right, this is a big deal. But for me, it was, just having fun serving my country.
It's pretty wild how you think of it that way. Yeah, it's pretty wild how you think of it. What is the percentage of people becoming generals? It's minuscule.
Gosh,
it's very, very small. To see that star on the Humvee or whatever you're being driven around, that's pretty unique to have that. But what year was it when you went to China? I'm curious.
So first time it was 2002. So I actually went to language training at Monterey, the Defense Language Institute.
BLI.
Studied China for 52 weeks. It's a 62-week course. I left in 52 weeks in June of 2002. Steph and I and our two boys went in the country and lived in Shanghai, in Pudong, on the east side of the city, and that's the side that the Communist Party built up in the 90s, so that's where the Jinmao building is, and a lot of the financial district of Shanghai, and we just traveled the country and lived with the people, and it was probably one of the most phenomenal 2 years of my life.
It was a phenomenal experience.
It was
for you.
incredible. You know, the people were great. They're hardworking, resilient people, and you know, having learned the language before I got there, I could communicate and really travel all over, and really got to know how they think, and you know, in a lot of ways, you know, not really fully understanding what was going on. I don't think you can live in China and fully understand what it is to be Chinese. But for me, as an outsider looking at that country, it was exciting, and it was a place that I wanted to be. And so when I left in 2004, I told Stephanie that, hey, when I retire from the Air Force, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to start a business and get
so
wealthy.
that was the plan, to want to come back.
That was the plan.
Now, what's your rank at that time when you were there in 2002?
So when I got there, I had just made major. So
you were already.
I'd been in 10 years at the time.
You had been in 10 years. You were major.
Right.
And what was your job? What were you doing in China for U.S.?
So the Olmsted program, which is a program that I was selected for, essentially picks 3 officers from each branch of the service and sends them to language school. It's not for you to go into a country that has English as a national language, but a foreign language, and so and then sends you in the country for 2 years. And I went to a university in Shanghai, Tongji University, and studied MBA courses, and really it was about getting to know the people. It was really becoming immersed in what it was to understand China, the Chinese culture and history and the language.
So does China know that you're going in as a major? Is that a something that it's a basic open conversation? Hey, we're sending one of our majors from Air Force to spend a couple years with you?
One of the great things about the Olmsted Scholar Program is that you do everything on your own. So once you're accepted into the program and you go to language training, it's upon your responsibility to go and get accepted into university, to apply for a visa, because they want you to understand what it takes to travel to a foreign country. And so it's almost like being on a sabbatical. You don't have a detailer that you're talking to. You're basically cut loose on your own recognizance to go and figure it out.
But you're getting paid, so the military
still getting paid.
Okay.
I mean, it is really an incredible opportunity, because you're really learning because you don't have a lot of support. You know, you're out there by yourself, trying to figure it out. And there was, how do I get there, become a student, get a student visa, but also how do I get my family in there, and how do I make sure that so we had to take them out of country every 60 or every 90 days to 6 months to renew the visa and come back in.
So China didn't know you were there and you were a major.
They didn't. I was not there in an official capacity. I wasn't there on an official visa or on a diplomatic passport. I was there on basically a tourist passport with a student visa, going to a university. Now, when I met Chinese, I would tell them, hey, I'm in the Air Force, I'm a B-2 pilot. Of course, they thought that was quite strange that I would be there, but
That's exactly what I would be thinking about, because from what you read on culture, you sense a certain level of, not paranoia or suspicious, but why are you here? What do you do? Are you a spy? You'd look like a CIA guy. I mean, if you go there, I'd look at you saying maybe you are working and you're trying to gather intel to bring you back, but that was actually not the case.
But this was 2002 to 2004, and what was happening there, if you remember, China just entered the WTO, so it was breakneck speed to grow the country and grow the economy. Mm-hmm. And all of my neighbors were there building factories for Fortune 100 companies, and so there was a lot less scrutiny on me as a military guy. I think it was the country at the time was focused on making money, and certainly people found out who I was, but I didn't get a lot of scrutiny.
That's good to hear that they didn't do anything. Now, the second time you went back was what year?
The second time I went back was in December of 2016, and that was to be the defense attaché in Beijing.
And this time around, this is a little bit more public. They know a little bit more that you're going, or still same situation?
No, this is definitely, I am the senior defense official representing the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs to the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army in Beijing. And so I For example, I got there a week before they took the UUV. I don't know if you remember, but they took one of our underwater gliders in the South China Sea, essentially while one of our ships was trying to retrieve it. And so there was a big
controversy.
There was a big diplomatic controversy, and that was beginning to be a crisis. And I was the one that negotiated the return with the People's Liberation Army of that glider to the U.S.
What was the biggest difference you felt culturally and spirit from 0204 to December 2016?
I never saw a guy with a gun when I was there from 2000 to 2004. When I got back in 2016, there were people with guns at the subway stops. Not all of them, but they were there. And you could definitely feel a palpable change in kind of the tone of the country. Now, some of that may be because it's not Shanghai, it's Beijing, which is the nation's capital. But clearly, things were a heck of a lot more tense when I had been there in 2002 to 2000. Just a completely, in my mind, different vibe.
What, from your experience, and what obviously to write a book like this specific to China, you've had to do a lot of research to be able to write what you've written here. Do you think a part of that happened where they are now growing up to the point where they're not growing up, that's maybe a bad word, they're becoming a bigger, I mean, GDP-wise, they grew, to being at a higher number than what they were before. They're becoming a little bit more competitive. 2008 Olympics, it was a statement, they're opening, so hey, we are here to compete. Do you think a part of that is also their level of confidence to know that we can compete with everybody? Let's be a little bit more cautious and protective of what we're trying to build, so look out there, or that was just a different city for you?
Well, no, I think there's a couple of things. One, the Communist Party was really concerned about corruption. If you go back to 1989, the Tiananmen massacre, the three things that the Chinese Communist Party learned during that time was, one, the Communist Party was under attack by elements within China in league with the United States. Two, that openness was great for globalization in terms of science and technology and economics and finance, but in terms of ideology, they needed to pour a whole lot more into what they were doing in order to prevent their population from becoming democratized. And three, if the party ever became separated from the people, that the party would fail. And you can see that there's a definite paranoia on the part of the party in terms of not wanting to make sure that while their people are very advanced in terms of the technology and the business models with regard to the e-economy, they're very cautious about that kind of getting out of control. And so I think, they are still, in their minds, perfecting their ability to control people, but at the same time, they're concerned about, at any moment, this thing could become unraveled. So it creates this kind of,
They really believe that.
They really believe that, that it could, at any moment, the party could essentially lose control because the population essentially awakes, and so I think it plays into that paranoia.
Yeah. So are they more concerned internally for it to collapse, or somebody from the outside to come and penetrate and confuse them and divide, from within?
I think it's a combination. It's a combination of internally in terms of do they have legitimacy in the eyes of the people, and then what are some things that might, in their minds, confuse the people in terms of, democracy or human rights or civil liberties.
So with you now being who you are, and you were with the National Security Council, Senior Director of Strategy, you've written this book, it's very obvious on who you are and what your position is at. Is someone like you able to go back with no issues? Like, would you be comfortable saying, I'm going to take my family to China?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
No.
Why is that?
Well, because clearly what I say in that book is that the Communist Party is not great for the Chinese people, and that's not something that they appreciate. People like me saying, certainly the way that you become a China expert in the United States is that you go to China. In order to go to China, that you say things that actually the Communist Party doesn't get angry about. And so they may not even give me a visa, but even if they were to give me a visa, I would be concerned that I would go there and they would find some reason to not let me go back.
Not let you come back here.
Right.
Even though Well, I mean, today would be a good time to actually keep you if you went over there. So if you have any
Right.
plans of staying in
Right.
China, you may want to go.
I don't want to go for a long
Yeah.
vacation.
So
But let me go back to something you said, because the other thing that really happened, and you mentioned 2008, and it's important because it's not only the paranoia that they have, but also if you go back to Deng Xiaoping and what he said about hiding capability and biding time. This is not a change in what the Communist Party, who they are. It's really in 2008 when our financial system essentially said that we really don't know how to run global finance, that they really believed that they had arrived. And so there's also an element of they've been, having to play second fiddle based on the century of humiliation and the fact that, they were the dominant society for 5,000 years. They had 100 years of bad luck, and now they're back on top. They're ready now to essentially take a leading role in the international system. So, part of that goes with not just, that vibe is not just with how they treat their population, but also how they treat the West, how they treat foreigners, because there is an element that says we're not going to back down anymore. We're going to stand up for what we believe, and we're going to make a name for ourselves in the international order, and we're going to fight to have our interests respected.
you mean them?
Them.
Yeah. So you say in the book, I mean, obviously I got a lot of notes here. I got 7-8 pages of notes to go through with you. But you said in the book that not you said this, I think Steve Bannon said this, but you quoted it. The biggest threat to America is not Al-Qaeda. The biggest threat to America is not, actually this is you saying it in the book, I believe, because Steve Bannon said something else. The biggest threat to America is not Al-Qaeda, it's not ISIS, it's not Putin, it's not any of these guys, it's China. You really believe that?
I believe it. I think it's the most consequential, existential threat, not just to America, just to democracy the world's ever seen. And it's because it's cloaked itself in this picture of adoption of the international norms that were established and the rules and norms and the systems and the institutions that were established after World War II, perpetuated through the Cold War, and essentially, in our thoughts, was dominant after the end of the Cold War. They wrapped themselves in that, and so there's a belief that they accept those principles, and what they say is they want to have the international system essentially correspond to their interests. But what they don't say what their interests are, and their interests are essentially counter to every democratic principle that we stand for: human rights, civil liberties, rule of law.
It's interesting when you say that, because that's a pretty bold statement to make. You hear a lot of people talk about climate change. You hear a lot of people talk about cyber war, all this other stuff, which you talk about in the book as well. But to say China is at the highest level more than ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Putin, that's strong statements to be making. But let's go a little bit back to, you are working as the Senior Director Strategy of the National Security Council. And you go in, you said you have two reasons why you wanted to be a part of the member. One was to educate the members about who they are, and the other one was to ensure the security of 5G for US and also other countries, right? Not just US,
right.
Everybody else that's involved. And then you're giving this one talk, and you brought some other people to also give insight. There was a lot of dialogue, and then it got a little bit heated. And then you held the meeting back, kind of trying to bring everybody together. Hey, this is a good question. We're having this discourse. This is a very good thing. Where did it go from there to the press leaking, being leaked to the press, and then from there you getting fired from National Security Council? How did that process take place?
So the debate on how we were going to treat China really was taking place during the summer of 2017, and it was really about how were we going to structure the national security strategy, what was going to be our priorities, and that was a process of discovery. And quite frankly, that's all I had been working on since 2014. So from 2014 to 2017, when I get to the White House, my 2 years in the Joint Staff, my time in Beijing, and then coming to the White House in May of 2017, everything had been focused on this competition between the U.S. and China and what the implications were on a societal level, an economic level, on a national security level. When I get into the National Security Council in 2017, we start the discussions on framing and writing the new national security strategy. And so in that dialogue was the first thing you do when you have a strategy is, what's your problem statement? What are what are the threats that the United States faces? And of course, the same thing that you just mentioned, a lot of people talk about climate change, they talk about terrorism. What we had to contend with is there's a lot of things happening that people outside of national security policy may be aware of, don't talk about, that affects everything that we do. And so I started, because I had those discussions outside of the national security policy establishment, I started bringing that information in. And really, for the first time, by the spring of 2017, I had formed in my mind a good picture of how to describe it, what the elements of it were, and then, essentially how to have a logical conversation that said, these are the challenges we face, and this is what we need to do. That conversation by August of 2017 was complete, and then I said, I'm going to be here a short amount of time. If I could do one thing for national security policy to change the course of the United States going forward, to preserve our republic, it would be to secure the internet. And so I started working on talking to engineers about what is 5G, what's the state of play today, because we'd said in the national security strategy that data is a strategic resource, like oil in the 20th century, data in the 21st century, which will drive artificial intelligence and everything that all the algorithms that essentially guide our lives to better places. If we didn't secure that strategigic resource, then we were at risk as a democracy. And so how do we take that new essentially beamforming antennas with software-defined radios and networks, which something that we had used in the military for a long time, and apply and give it to the people, but then do it in a way that actually provides security for their data, which is in essence what I'd come to the conclusion the only way that you democratize in a digital sense is by protecting, is by giving control at the citizen level of their data.
Of their data.
Of their data.
Okay.
It is, and the analogy I make when I talk to people is, if you go back to Alexander Hamilton and the framing of the Constitution, essentially what he was shooting for after having surveyed, done an extensive survey of all the governments that existed prior, was how do we create a government where no one person, party, or group can attain ultimate power, because ultimate power is ultimately corrupting. And so that's the Constitution, but then what if it fails? What if, we don't actually provide for the people and somebody can gain power? Then we give the American people the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, so that they can fight an oppressive government if that dream ever fails. And of course, in the digital world, what you had begun to see, is a world where you may not know you're being oppressed, or you may not know your oppressor. And in that world,
you may not know you're the oppressor.
You may not know you're being oppressed.
Or the second one
or
was?
that who your oppressor is.
Who your oppressor is.
Right? Because we'd seen for instance, after the election, using big data analysis, AI bots, and social media networks, the Russians had created protests. Right? They had it was ostensibly on behalf of Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about the one in New York City a few days after the election, but it was really the Russians. And so what you're seeing is, in going back to data as a strategic resource, in the digitized world, the ability to aggregate data is equivalent to aggregating power. And if you can aggregate power, then you have to wonder about who has the ability to aggregate data in that world. And today, the two entities that can really aggregate data are large tech companies and totalitarian regimes. Democracies have a hard time aggregating data. The United States cannot aggregate data because the law prevents it from doing so. So we started this unit within the State Department called the Global Engagement Center. The Global Engagement Center was supposed to fight radicalization, for instance, by ISIS, and prevent influence of our population. But they can't do their job because they can't aggregate data. Not even public-facing Twitter data, right? Because there's concern that we use the resources of the government to spy on our own population. But one of the ways that foreign states go after us is actually to take our own social media data and use it in ways that influence us. And so in order to discover that, you actually have to be in the data. And so the only ones that can be in the data today are the large tech companies. And so you're essentially offloading to the large tech companies one of the primary purposes of forming the Constitution, which is in the preamble, provide for the common defense. And so if you think about national security, and it gets really the heart of things, right? If you think about national security, we have an Air Force, we have an Army, we have a Navy, we have a Marine Corps, right? I don't think you're worried about, Marines jumping into your building here or getting bombed, right? You're not concerned about that. But I guarantee you the Chinese are in your networks, and the Russians and the North Koreans and everybody else.
You guarantee?
I guarantee it. They're in your networks. They're in everybody's networks. This is what they do. And so if they're in your networks...
That's strong statements. You're saying you're guaranteeing China and Russia's in our network.
I guarantee it. I guarantee it, particularly because you put out that video on China. I guarantee they've come at this place. But so who's responsible for protecting you from that?
Government?
No,
I would assume. Then
no,
who is it?
Not at all. The government protects their own networks. They don't protect your networks.
Got it.
So
you're saying responsibility on the entrepreneur
you're responsible
to do that.
to protect your own network. And then, of course, if do you have a Twitter account? Do you have?
I do.
Okay. Twitter's responsible for protecting that.
Twitter is responsible for protecting my account on Twitter.
Right.
And I'm responsible for protecting my network.
Your data,
my data,
right,
what I have
right.
here, which we've invested
It's
into
not
that.
the U.S. government.
Sure, but now let me ask you this. So I had a former undercover FBI agent right here. He sat in that chair 3 weeks ago. So I asked him. I said, "So what is the real, line you don't cross between the government protecting me, right? Because the government getting too involved, and hey." The whole Apple going to DMV getting IDs, not Apple, the government going to the DMV and saying we want to get the licenses, and then government getting to Apple and saying we want to be able to get access to the phone conversations in case a terrorist does this. Well, in China, because some people will say, well, China is set up in a way where they feel like they're a company and they control what everybody does because they work for the company, right? Where America looks at, this is actually how I view America. America sees their citizens as 1099. China sees their citizens as W-2. So because they have more control, it's tougher to infiltrate their system than America's because America kind of leaves everybody alone. Would you agree with that, where we are left a little bit more to ourselves without the top having access to the private companies to get data to see if anybody's tapping into our systems, or no?
You mean from our government perspective?
Yes.
You're left totally alone.
Do you think that's okay?
No, I don't think it's okay.
Oh, so you're saying they should be more involved?
They should be involved in protecting your data. They should be involved in ensuring that there is not undue influence placed on you by a foreign nation so that you are making decisions based on influence that's coming from outside our borders.
Okay, so now somebody's watching this and saying, well, Pat, that's exactly what a big government guy would say, because let them control us and they can do they know what's best for us to keep us safe.
I'm not saying that the government has access to your data.
You're saying they should.
They should not have access to your data. They should ensure that nobody else has access to your data either.
Why wouldn't
you remember San Bernardino? And there's an argument between Apple and FBI.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And Apple said, we're not giving you the back door.
I remember that clearly.
Okay?
Yeah.
So think about that in the context of what we're talking about here. I don't think anybody should have that back door to have access to your data. A foreign country,
so you're not saying
our own country.
Okay.
No, nobody should. What I'm saying is the only one that should have say over who has access to your data is you. That's what it means to live in a democracy, in a digital world.
But then this gives me the question. So if you're saying the only one that should have access to my data, that's fine. We're in agreement there. But if China is hacking into my data and getting access to what I'm doing, you're saying the government should prevent that from happening. How can they do that if they don't have access to what I'm doing?
Well, they can have access to the network. They don't have to have access to your data, right? Because if your data is encrypted, they can't actually see what your data is, but they can certainly see what China's doing. I mean, that piece, I'm confident that we have an understanding of what they're doing within our networks. Just their actual protecting that or preventing that from happening doesn't occur. That's why, by the way, China built the Great Firewall, because they wanted to protect their population, because they realized that if they didn't protect their population, then globalization and the open internet would allow for democratic values to seep in. So they wanted to protect their people from influence that came from outside the country.
You think that's a good move?
I think that's a great move, because if you're connected to a totalitarian regime and you're open, and the totalitarian regime is intent on influencing your population, the way we've designed our current internet absolutely allows for it.
But doesn't that mean that we become totalitarian if we do that as well? Like, to match against them, we kind of have to.
If we did what they did, right? So they didn't
Which
protect.
means what?
They didn't protect their individual data from them as a government. They just protected it from the outside. So they built a wall around it. What I'm telling you is you have control over your data. Not the government, not our government, not their government, not Twitter, not Facebook, that you own it. And so if Facebook wants to sell your data, then they have to get your permission and may even have to pay you to do so.
If they want to sell my
If they
information.
want to sell your data.
Who are you more concerned about, the totalitarian regime or the large technology companies?
I would say today they have the same business model.
Really?
Of course.
Tell me why.
Look at them today. Both China and Facebook have sensors. China sends their sensors to school. What do the sensors learn? The sensors actually learn about Tiananmen Square, the truth, right?
Okay.
Because they have to censor that discussion on the network. Facebook has sensors. The sensors go to school to learn what they need to censor on Facebook's network, right? Same business model. It's about free data. It's about using that data, except for this one, it's about profit. For this one, it's about control. And they, even down to the sensors, they have the same model.
You're putting them at the same level. Wow.
I'm not saying,
I'm
not at the same level, because one is about profit, one's about control. What I'm telling you is the system that we built, the technological foundations of the system we built, then the app services and business models that we built on top of that allow for power to be equated with aggregation of data. When you do that, you create business models. The business model of a large tech company is equivalent to the business model of China.
So do you think, you know how for them, like they don't allow Twitter, Facebook, YouTube to go in, they have their own YouTube, they have their own Facebook,
Right.
all of that they have. Do you think, are you suggesting that we should only create it for US and not have it available to other countries to have access to our social media? Or that's not what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay, so you're not saying put a firewall where the social media is just for us.
No.
You're saying firewall to protect us from somebody else coming through the system.
And really what I was saying, if you go to page 19 of the National Security Strategy, it says it right there, we're going to build a nationwide secure 5G network. In other words, we're going to build a network unlike any network that's ever been built before. And it's really about protecting individual data so that you have control of your data, nobody else does, and then you can figure out how to use it. And then we would take that network that we built, and then we'd share it with our democratic allies and partners. If you build a network like this, a totalitarian regime can't control the population because they can't prevent them. They don't know what information they have access to. They can't see into what they're saying, right? Which is what you can have in China. They can't block you out from having other information that they might not want you to have because they can't see what you're doing. And it really becomes a competitive advantage, both from an economic standpoint, but also from a societal standpoint.
Let me ask you this. When you came out and you had the meeting and you talked about China the way you did, right? And you kind of said, here's what we have to worry about with this side, and this is what they're going to be doing. They are our biggest threat, and then here's 5G, what's really going on. Did you immediately get a sense on who was for you and who was against your talking points? It's kind of like in this room. If I all of a sudden say, Tom Brady is the greatest of all time, within 5 seconds, I know who hates the Patriots and who likes them, right? Did you kind of sit there and say, oh, wow, that guy crosses arms. He's definitely not happy. He's curious. Did you get that feeling?
Yeah, so...
And was it across the board, one side politically, or was it both sides were happy and unhappy?
So let's go back to 5G, right?
Because, you know what I'm asking,
yeah,
right?
I know
Okay.
exactly what you're asking. Once the decision was made to confront China, that was a process that was just going to run. I didn't need to really focus on that. I focused on 5G. I focused on the secure internet. When I started sharing, because what I had done is I spoke to network engineers, people that built networks. When I started sharing the ideas that we had come up with, if I had been smarter politically at the time, I would have known exactly how to answer that question. And I would have said anybody that's got telecom in their portfolio was immediately against it, because the telecom industry was immediately against it, right? That was a clear signal that if I was paying attention at the time and really understood DC in a political way, I was a national security professional. I was a military guy. I didn't really get into politics. But in much the same way that you see industry influence on just about anything in DC, the industry, the telecom industry in particular, was, once this kind of made its way outside of government channels, because those people that are in a telecom job in DC have some relationship with the industry, that information got out. Once it got out, the industry said, and that's when I started my pathway to having my paper leaked and me asked to leave the National Security Council.
Did you you know how sometimes if you say something, you either don't know the consequence of you saying something, or and you say it anyways? Which one were you?
I would say that both.
Okay.
Right. So some of them I did not. Some of them I didn't know. I didn't know the political lay of the land, but at the end of the day, it was about preserving our republic. It was about our Constitution. It was about national security. It's not about me. It was never about me. The first time, day one, when I take the oath of office in putting on the uniform, it's not about me anymore. It's about the Constitution. It's about preserving the republic. If it ever became about me, then that's my time to leave.
Do you think most people start like a statesman like you, and then when you're around too much, then you get kind of tainted based on the environment you're around? You know what I'm saying, right? You get in. To me, most people I see, originals like, I really want to make an impact. I really want to do this. It's statements mentality.
Right.
And then you're like, hey, we have an opportunity to make 10 million here, 15 million here, 22 million here. We can have control over here. We can have more influence here. Do you think starts that when it changes? Where if you want to move up, you kind of need to get a little bit out there and accept the reality of what politics could do?
Well, so I look at myself as an entrepreneur. And when you take somebody that's entrepreneurial and that really believes in the oath of office that they've taken, and then you put them in a bureaucracy where they're not, I had, when I went to China, that I took a year at Language Institute, 2 years living in China, that's 3 years. I told the Air Force I'd give them back 3 for 1. So that added 10 years to my commitment. And so as time went on, and as I rose up in the ranks, and I would move, say, every year, I would get a 2-year commitment. So if you move every year and you get a 2-year commitment, you never really have the opportunity to get out. And so I'm an entrepreneur, I'm living in a bureaucracy, but I can't leave. I have no choice, I have to stay. So I can either say, get angry about it, right, that I'm beating my head against the wall because, things need to be done, or I can just learn to, live within it and try to drive as much change, as deep as I can, for as long as I'm there.
I asked this question for one reason. Like, you listen to Joe Biden. He's been in the political world for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay. Did he start off, having to play all these political games that you have to play, or was it a good cause? And then you look at Mitch McConnell, 2 names that you talk about in your book. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat. And they're both have some ties to China, right? One, Mitch McConnell, 1993, I think he married his wife, whose father's a very powerful, I don't know if you want to say the business owner, entrepreneur, and they're connected to the communistic regime. And then on the other side, Joe Biden, his son, Hunter, it's all over the news. Everybody's hearing about all the issues with what happened there. I ask it again, this is not something that's favorable to Democrats not liking China or wanting to support China, or this is not just Republicans not liking China or disliking China. This is purely on both sides on what you're seeing.
All right.
And when you went and investigated more, were you kind of like, oh my gosh, I didn't know the Biden family was like this? Or the McConnell, was it one of those things where the more and more and more research and investigation you did, the more like this is bigger than you thought it was? Did you have one of those moments yourself?
Well, so the one moment that I had was when I got the briefing in the fall of 2014. That was from one of the major audit firms. And when I opened that briefing and I realized, a lot of the elements that we would use to attack a country using an air attack, I saw play out in front of my eyes using economics, finance, and information. And so, that was a moment. It broke my mind, because up until that point, I thought America's the greatest nation on earth, and we're unassailable, we're the most powerful, nothing could happen to us. And that was the point when I realized that, no, we could have carrier battle groups, nuclear subs, F-35s, and all of this capability and spend $800 billion a year on defense. But if our society was basically being attacked at their job level, at their societal level, then we had lost the ability to protect our nation in a globalized, internet-powered world. And from that point on, I just started studying. And I read everything I could, and I talked to everybody I could. So because I had been at the Council on Foreign Relations, I had access to a lot of executives of finance companies, of investment companies. And so I started going around and talking to some of their research offices and talking to people and trying to understand what was going on in our country and how global business worked, how global finance worked, how did investment work. And did I ever stop finding rot? No. I find it every single day. As you continue to pull back the layers of it, you realize it goes through our society because it's based on this fundamental belief that openness will lead to democracy. And that is the key to China, the Chinese Communist Party's power, because when we believe that openness would lead to democracy, they said, there's my opportunity, because they're going to let me have access to their finance, their trade, their investment, their immigration, their media, their politics, the internet, academia. I have access to everything. Think about Commodore Perry sailing in with the Great Fleet into Japan. He had to use guns to get into Japan. We just let the Chinese in, and sometimes we forced them to pay, sometimes we just gave it to them.
It's kind of part of their philosophy, though. If you think about the whole Confucius and art of war, it's battling without having to battle, right? The whole philosophy that you talk about, which was brilliant when you talked about it in the book. But what did you learn from the McConnell family, and what did you learn from Biden's connection to China?
What I learned at the White House, and this was really at the White House, because before you go to the White House, you always hear these stories about, it's the White House calling. People stand up and how can I help you? So I'm at the White House, and I'm working with think tanks and law firms trying to, number one, expose what the Chinese were doing, but number two, come up with credible policy options that we could implement that would get them, that would prevent them from taking advantage of our population. And time after time, they say, sorry, I can't help you. I don't want to anger my Chinese funders or my Chinese customers. My partners aren't comfortable with us because we have a lot of business in China. And I'm like, I'm calling from the White House. And our top
they would
think
literally
tanks,
give you this answer.
Top think tanks and the top law firms in the country were telling me, I can't help you. And so, I knew this already, right? So, but then when you really get an understanding of, okay, if they won't even help the White House, then we've got a serious, serious problem.
What did you learn about McConnell and Biden family?
Well, so I put, they're the only ones that I named in the book, and the reason I did is because it's all out in the open. You can go read the sources, the New York Times report, Wall Street Journal reports. Biden, his son, went with him on Air Force Two over to China. 10 days later is named a board member of Bohai Harvest hedge fund, which is a $1.5 billion hedge fund. McConnell, you already talked about, his family, his father-in-law knows Jiang Zemin, former chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, and his sister-in-law is on the board of the Bank of China, right? What influence would you say is there? They would say there is no influence. That just happened, part of McConnell, it happens to be my family relationships. On the part of Biden, he would say, that was my son. You really had nothing to do with me, although he did go over with him on Air Force Two. But that being said, it's not about quid pro quo. It's about adopting Xi Jinping's worldview. And his worldview, which he says at Davos many times, is globalization's good. We should continue to have open markets. We should continue to have open systems so that we can all collectively do well together as a global community. That's essentially, I'm paraphrasing what Xi Jinping says. But that's not what he believes. Because if you read the Chinese Communist Party documents, like, for instance, the document number 9 that have come out of the country and have been translated, then you realize they repudiate every single element of, for example, the Atlantic Charter, which is a good one-page template for the international order, signed by FDR and Winston Churchill, 8 paragraphs, 1 page, democratic principles, free trade, rule of law, and self-determination. That's it. That in a nutshell, that tells you about what the UN, WTO, Bretton Woods, all that's about. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't believe in any of those. So when he goes to Davos, Xi Jinping goes to Davos and he says, we need to stay open for business. It's not we need to stay open for business because democracy, human rights, civil liberty, and rule of law are great. It's because if you stay open for business, I can ensure that we have access to science, technology, innovation, and capital, and talent.
So let me ask this question. So for me, I used to be in business with a guy who, behind closed doors, this one guy, I would always look at him and I would talk to him. He was always afraid of one guy. And he couldn't stand the other guy he was working with. But he was frightened of him. I'm like, why are you afraid of that guy? And I would always ask him, I'm trying to figure out why you're afraid of this guy. Why are you afraid of this guy? Finally, a year and a half later, I found out what it was. So he was doing some things with business behind closed doors, and it was not gray, it was a little bit past gray, close to, breaking the law. And eventually he got caught. But under the table, he was paying him $25,000 a month, cash, not 1099, not W-2, which 25 cash is $50K a month pre-tax, right? The same as $600,000 a year income. So one day he's upset and he tells one of my competitors, and that comes to me, and I find out about it. I'm like, now it makes sense why he is afraid of him. But then, when he stopped paying the $25,000 cash, the other guy told everybody about his business, and he lost it anyways, right?
Right.
So for me, here's how I view it, and I want to get your perspective to see how you see this. The NBA situation right now, with what's going on with LeBron, right? Or not just LeBron. There was Maury, right? The Houston GM makes a comment about what's going on over there. And then they're upset, canceling all preseason games. And then all of a sudden, the owner of Houston makes his comments. And then from there, Adam Silver says, I support freedom of speech. Steve Kerr didn't want to say anything because he kind of didn't have wasn't too educated on the situation at that time. Popovich said a few words. And then LeBron says maybe he misspoke, right? What he shouldn't have said. So for me, I look at that and say, okay, why is this happening? I want to kind of get your thoughts as well. Why are they doing this? Okay, why would they be doing this? Is it political? To me, it's not political. To me, it's 1.5 billion viewers there. Same reason why U.S. is trying to make movies over there, and you're getting Rock making movies doing $600 million here with giving love to China versus just doing it. It's another market. Actually, to me, that's pretty honest because it's money play.
Right.
It's not political play or anything. Man, we can sell 1.5 billion people more shoes. We can sell them more media. We can go out there and get the games to go over there. Instead of making 40 million a year, we make 50 million a year, 60 million a year. In a situation like this, before I ask you the LeBron opinion, but in a situation like this, do you process it from the standpoint of, well, maybe Mitch has some a business that he's doing, and out of respect to his wife, he's just kind of giving the respect to China. And maybe Biden's son has some respect, and it's a son. You don't have 50 sons. You got a couple sons. It's blood. He's just trying to protect his son to do what he's doing. Do you think that is an acceptable reasoning to allow them to do what they're doing, or should it be America first because of the responsibilities that you have then your kids, your wife, your family. How do you process that?
Well, let me put it this way, and this was really something I had told my wife leading up to 2016 elections. Now, you were in the military, right? If I had any of the relationships that I just talked about, there is no way I could have a security clearance. Wouldn't happen. I could not get that through the system. It would not grant me a top secret security clearance.
If you were, let me clarify, if you're Mitch McConnell or Joe Biden with those relationships, you wouldn't be able to get the security clearance that you have.
Right.
Fair enough. Okay?
Right?
Yep. Absolutely.
This is just facts. So, if I had taken my personal email or my work email and basically taken that all off and put it on a server and had some classified message, what do you think would have happened to me?
You're fired. You're
court-martialed.
Yeah,
right?
court-martialed. Absolutely.
Kicked out.
It's not even 180.
Right? No,
you're done.
there's no doubt.
Sure.
And so, as you see these things, these kinds of things that I know that whoever gets elected as commander-in-chief has a responsibility. They are the chief diplomat. They're the chief law enforcement officer. They're the commander-in-chief. So how can that person have the kind of relationships that I, as a military member, can't even have a security clearance with, or do the kind of things that I would be fired or court-martialed with? So, it's pretty black and white to me. When you're the commander-in-chief and you are requiring the people that work for you, that swear an oath, that are working for you as the chief executive, particularly commander-in-chief, because commander of a military force is much different than being the senior executive at a company. It's a completely different type of authority over somebody. The authority to not just fire but also imprison, right? Because that's court-martial authority. And yet you do the things that you say or you must enforce that they cannot do. Then you've created a problem. And this is pervasive in our system, that our politicians can have the kind of relationships that we can't even allow our military members to have security clearances having. Let's leave that aside. Okay, we'll just set that aside.
Okay.
Now you have the President of the United States saying, here's a non-market economy that we basically let into the WTO in 2001, and they broke every rule in the book and continue to, and they're not going to stop. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to treat them just like we did prior to going to the WTO. Prior to going to the WTO, they had to have a vote on most favored nation status every single year. Right? Once that stopped, then corporate money started pouring in. Foreign direct investment started pouring into China, and they grew like crazy. They took 70,000 factories and 3.4 million manufacturing jobs. And so the President of the United States says, okay, they're clearly don't have any intention on following the rules. We're going to put tariffs on, because that's what we had before. We started and we let them in. We're going to do the same exact thing. And then you have Joe Biden and you have Mitch McConnell saying that's a bad idea. Now, do those relationships contribute to that, or is it just because they believe that? I don't know the answer to that, but I guarantee you, any counterintelligence officer that brought me into interrogation asking me why I made that decision, they would have grounds to say, you're untrustworthy. You didn't report that, your relative was making, millions of dollars from the Chinese, or you didn't report that you got millions of dollars from the Chinese. So I'm not saying that there's quid pro quo there, but there's enough of, hey, I don't like tariffs, to, hey, I've adopted Xi Jinping's worldview, to, hey, this is actually harmful to the United States. I leave it to other people to kind of figure that out. It's not for me to figure out. It is for me to say that if I had done it on active duty in the military, I'd either not have a security clearance or I'd have been court-martialed.
So let me ask you this. That same argument, you got two different communities here, okay? You got those who have political power and influence, say McConnell, Biden, and many other names who support China, and they're saying, hey, take it easy.
Right.
They're an ally. I think you went to the Department of Commerce and they said, China's not the adversary, they're our friends, we cooperate with them.
Right.
These were the words you wrote in your book, right? Okay. So on one side you have the political people, that they shouldn't be doing this, because if they have interest with their kids, wife, whatever, okay. Then the other side is investors, business owners, hedge fund folks, entrepreneurs, folks who made their money in America, yet they want to make sure China still has the ability to do business because they lose money, right?
Of course.
This goes to the bottom line.
Right.
Do you think their motives is okay because it's just purely money and they want to protect their investments for themselves, their clients, their businesses. And these two are complete different ways to be held accountable?
That's the system we built, right?
You know what I'm asking,
I know
obviously.
exactly what
Okay.
you're asking. That's the system we built. And so you can't criticize businessmen because our system says you owe fiduciary responsibility to the shareholder. That's your job. And oh, by the way, you can actually be sued or brought up on charges for not doing your job, not fulfilling your fiduciary responsibility. So there could be an argument made that if you're not cooperating with the Chinese Communist Party, that you're actually harming your company. Okay?
There you go.
Right?
Okay.
So
Got
you
it.
can't criticize them for that. What you can criticize is the policies of the government that allowed for the behavior to occur in the first place. And I'll give you an example. Level 1 versus level 3 assets. I talk about it in the book. China has non-convertible currency, strict capital controls. Since 2015, you can't get money out of the country, only in special circumstances, and only depending on what the business you're doing. So we have plenty of corporations that have billions of dollars over there that they're carrying on their financial statements as level 1 assets, meaning just like cash in the bank here. But you can't get it. And so, but if you're showing profits and it's going into cash in the bank in China, then how are you being compensated as an executive or on a board of directors for that company? You're probably getting compensated based on the money you're making in China. But yet the shareholders can never see that money because you have strict capital controls in a non-convertible currency. Okay, so we've created an incentive system just based on our accounting standards, FASB, and the Securities and Exchange Commission can change this. The Treasury Department could change this and say, no, if it's in China, it's non-convertible currency, strict capital controls, they can't get the money out, it's a level 3 asset. And therefore, all you corporations need to do a restatement. What would that say? Now CEOs wouldn't want to invest in China because it wouldn't count toward their compensation. Now board of directors wouldn't advise the CEOs that they should invest in China because it wouldn't count towards their compensation. We build a system that incentivizes behavior for the destruction of the country.
Yeah.
That's not the fault of the business community. That's the fault of the government.
Great point. So essentially a company who runs a sales organization runs a compensation structure that produces bad behavior. It's not the salesperson's fault. It's the organization's fault for producing compensation structure the way it did. So
Right.
What you're saying is a complete restructure of our agreements and arrangements with China. You're talking about having to change a lot of things for us to move forward. You're not just saying something small here.
But I'm not saying that we're doing something that's untoward. I'm just saying let's follow the rules. For instance, in investment, right?
Let's us follow the rules, or let's
everybody
them, China's also following the rules.
Right, exactly. So
Well, they're not going to follow the rules, though.
right, then, for example, so let's go into investing. So now, right now, we have MSCI All World Index went from 0 to 5% to 20% weighting in Chinese equities, right? Okay, Chinese companies, they come here, they register their stocks and list on some of our exchanges, but let's go the unlisted ones, the registered ones. That's $1 trillion they've made off our capital markets. There's no audit or transparency requirements that resembles anything that a U.S. company has to follow, right? So a Chinese company can come in here and get registered and get listed on our stock exchange and get access to our retirement funds. That's what MSCI All World Index is followed by all the institutional investors and the endowments, the university endowments. So our retirement funds get sent over to China to pay for investments that we have no idea actually what they have because they don't have the same audit and transparency requirements of a U.S. company. That's a policy that we have right now. So China can register and list their stocks on our exchanges, and our retirement investment officers can send money over to China, and they don't have to correspond to the same rules that U.S. companies have to. So make Chinese companies correspond to the exact same rules that U.S. companies have to, and I'll tell you why they won't. Because sending over the audit data is a national security violation in China. In other words, it is treason for you to send the audit information from a Chinese company to the U.S.
Let me ask you, do you see any possibility of an agreement coming up with all these technicalities? This is not a small thing here.
No.
Okay, so you are for, you don't
the
think...
Chinese have already decided to decouple. It's not about us decoupling. It's about the Chinese Communist Party maintaining control over their society. And in order to maintain control over their society, they need to maintain control over the state-owned enterprise system that they built, which says that we are not going to abide by U.S. laws about sending over audit and transparency requirements. If you force us to do that, tough, we're not going to.
How China took over while the America's elite slept, okay? Is the monster too big right now to control?
No, not at all.
Okay, that's what I was asking. So it's not yet. So what will be some of the things? I know you talk about it at the end of the book, but if you're saying the monster's not too big to control, is that your 4 points that you talk about at the end of the book?
It is.
Let's get to the end of the interview with that. I don't want to go into that right now because we'll get to that while we're going through it. So, okay. So we just talk about business, what responsibilities they have, et cetera, and then we talk about politics. What are your views on how NBA is handling the bullying of China, saying, hey, we're going to not show any of the preseason games in China?
Do you know what an ECMO machine is?
No.
So an ECMO machine is a machine that is used to keep a body alive when the heart and lungs are failing.
Okay.
And so it takes blood out of the system, it oxygenates it, and puts blood back. Actually, I knew somebody that had been hooked up to one of those things, and it's not a fun thing when you're dying and hooked up to an ECMO machine. China, if you say you're a dissident, you're a Falun Gong, you're a Christian, you're a Muslim, and you get sentenced to, say, 7 years in prison for being a religious follower, and you won't stop. They'll type your blood, they'll sequence your DNA, and they'll give you an ultrasound in your organs, and you go on a match list. If that match comes up, they'll hook you up to an ECMO machine, hook your body up to an ECMO machine. They'll give you an injection to paralyze you, and they'll have a surgeon come and remove your organs, put them into somebody that's come in for hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy your organs, to have it put because they need a heart or need a liver or need 2 kidneys or whatever. And when they've taken all the organs out that they can use, they'll throw the body in the incinerator. So when we do things like equate that kind of behavior with, say, the social challenges that we have in the United States, then it shows a fundamentally misunderstanding of the difference between a democracy and a totalitarian regime. And that's what I find so infuriating about what the NBA is doing, because that kind of behavior, that's the kind of behavior that Hitler was doing. That's the kind of behavior that existed in Stalin's Soviet Union. That's the kind of behavior that the Chinese Communist Party is doing today. You can go look it up on the UK Tribunal on the forced organ harvesting of prisoners of conscience. Summary reports there, final reports coming. They've interviewed hundreds of people. This is happening, and yet we equate, our social challenges here in the United States with that kind of behavior in China. That is, I think, the challenge of the NBA, is not understanding who they've allied themselves with. So let's take away the fiduciary responsibility that, the NBA commissioner has to not anger the Chinese Communist Party because the NBA makes a lot of money there. Let's take that away. Let's say he's an American. And a lot of Americans died fighting to stop the kinds of things that are going on right now in communist-controlled China. So, business guy, understand it. American, I can't for the life of me understand it. The only reason it is because they do such a good job of obfuscating, of hiding what they do, which is why the title of the book is Stealth War. And we've done a very, very poor job of opening our eyes. And the reason we've done a poor job of opening our eyes is because we are being compensated well to look the other way.
So, fine, let's just say I watched this and you said this and I'm an NBA person. I'm like, okay, what are you talking about? I don't really, I get that, but everybody's got dirt on their hands. America does. Look what America did to Japan. Look what America did to, so, that's the argument, right? So everybody's done some stuff. How many people did we do this? How many times have we killed people? So we have blood on our hands as well. Somebody from the NBA watching this. We're just trying to do business. We're just trying to make sure we keep a relationship with them because we want those 1.5 billion eyeballs. That's all we're trying to do. We saw what happened to Barkley when he went to the Olympics, and then from there, Kobe's identity Olympics after, the center from Houston, Yao Ming, and then now LeBron's getting bigger. All these guys are getting a big exposure there. What's wrong with us wanting to keep our relationship with China solid to not create any kind of a issue between us? Let the politicians go at it. We're just basketball players. We're just trying to play over there and entertain that audience as well.
Yeah, and I would say not surprising, because people were doing it for Hitler. And when those army soldiers walked into Dachau and saw what the hell was going on there, I would have hated to be one of those guys, seeing that, to see that, what could be done to people. And, I don't know what else to say about it.
Yeah.
The horror of this thing, that we can sit here and basically say, that's not my deal. I'm just going to get my compensation deal. I get that. I get the other thing where people are saying, well, America is just as bad as everybody else. Okay, but it's just not. I can't see it for me. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it will ever make sense to me.
I just don't like us to be bullied. I've never been a fan of bullies. My entire life, I've never liked bullies, and I've never liked games. And if you allow a bully to constantly bully you, and you walk on eggshells with the next moves you're making, you will forever walk on eggshells, because they officially know that they scared you. And so the next time you do something, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. It almost goes to the story of the Roy Jones guy that worked at Marriott.
Right.
I think his name is Roy Jones, because same as the boxer, right? He's working at Marriott, and if you can elaborate on what happened with the story, with him liking a tweet.
Yeah, he worked in the social media department of Marriott Corporation. He liked to tweet about Tibet. It was the tweet was from a Tibetan dissident group. He didn't know anything about Tibet. He didn't know anything about China. He was just saw that somebody had, given a shout out to Marriott, and he liked the tweet. Shanghai Tourism Bureau found out about it. Chinese called the Marriott Corporation and said, deal with this person and apologize. And they fired him and apologized. The NBA situation is no different, where they almost fired Maury. And by the way, this is happening. It's happened to Mercedes-Benz. It's happened to Tiffany's. It's happened, it's Cathay Pacific. I don't know if you remember, the CEO resigned rather than giving up the names for the people that were working for Cathay that were going with the people of Hong Kong in the protest. And oh, by the way, what are the people of Hong Kong protesting? Being extradited to a country that could basically put them on a donor list. So, it is really a fundamental difference. There's a stark difference in the type of country that you live in, where we live in today, where the NBA players live, and the country that is China. And the problem is, and there was a good article, op-ed by Li Yuan, who's from China, in the New York Times, recently, talking about what it's like to live in China and not understand the world you're living in because of the indoctrination and control over the way they think. So when you go there, you might think everybody's happy. Well, they are happy because they have very little access to anything, to know anything else.
Now, this Roy Jones guy from Marriott, did he get caught because the government is surveilling every move we make social media, or is it the culture? Because I was in UK a few months ago, and I was sitting down with a couple people saying, UK, we used to be people that we protected our nation. Now the government has taught people to become spies and all tell on each other. Or is it the culture of China of telling on each other and saying, look what he's doing, look what he's doing? Is it more they have a whole massive community around the world that's still watching out for China, or is it actually the government looking at the social media?
It's both.
Okay,
They have huge numbers monitoring social media,
and
they also have their citizens that are taught, that this is an affront to China, that the Hong Kong people don't really want peace. They're like the protester, or not they're like the terrorists of 9/11.
What is the biggest difference in the way you do business in China versus the way you do business in US? And here's what I mean by it. I don't mean I go start a business in China and since 2015, 2016, I can't take profits out. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, I'm a Chinese citizen. I live in China. I want to start a business and compete in a marketplace there. What is the difference between me competing in China and what kind of ways I'm controlled versus me competing in America?
Oh, that's easy. You can do whatever you want.
In China?
In China.
What does
literally,
that mean?
it means that whatever you need to do to get ahead is fair game, as long as you don't challenge the Communist Party. Whatever. Steal, trick, anything. I mean,
Seriously.
Seriously.
But not against each other, though.
Yes.
Come
Against
on.
each other. It is the most cutthroat, in a lot of ways, it's the most capitalist system there is.
So I would say there's like no regulation there.
There's no regulation, which is why you have the challenges that you have with regard to fentanyl and other things, because, if you're making profits, as long as it's not causing problems for the Chinese Communist Party, anything's, so you want to have a business, your competitor has a proprietary formula for something, you go find the guy that has a proprietary formula, hire him and bring him in, and hire him, and you can do that. Now, the guy can sue you, but this is the kind of behavior that happens all the time there.
Is there such things as patents there? Like, can I just steal your idea and you can't sue me? You know how there's a 2-year patent thing that nobody can use and you have the rights to go and put it out there first? Or I come steal it from you. You can't do nothing about it. You can't take me to court.
So they do have patents,
okay,
and you can sue. And sometimes you can even win. But, in the end, what the government is looking for and it's watching out for, and particularly it's in industries that they care about, like 5G, right? They're not really focused on some industries, but they are focused on, for instance, Made in China 2025 really pulls out 10 industries. If it's one that they're focused on, then they'll look at that competition and then they will incentivize those that are starting to rise to the top. And so, but if you happen to be, part of the Chinese Communist Party, leadership family, then you'll have incentives to, even more incentives than other people.
You will have more incentives.
You'll have more incentives.
So over there, is it the typical old school politics of if you want to be rich, first go into politics, have enough influence, and then go start a business?
You can't just go into politics.
You can't?
No.
How do you?
You have to, even Xi Jinping applied to go to the Chinese Communist Party like 5 or 6 times before he was finally accepted. It's like a club, right? And once you're in, then
How
you
do
have
I
to
get into the club?
You have to demonstrate your loyalty to the party and continue to apply. It is not.
I mean, it's very similar to the mob.
You can't just go in. It is very similar.
Very similar to the mob. You have
absolutely.
to be a made man. You have to do everything. You have loyal to them, and then they bring you in.
The reason they've given Xi Jinping so much power, by the way, is because he is probably the most dialed into what the Chinese Communist Party believes of anybody. Like if you said who is the most communist of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping is that guy, and that's the only reason they gave him all the power he did.
How powerful is their economy right now? Like, how much control do they have? What areas are they taking? I know like 80% of AC, when you look at these numbers here, what are some of the stats about how powerful China's become?
You mean in terms of?
Economy, manufacturing, production, what they're building, steel, phones, shoes.
Well, I mean, so just one of the things I said in the book, from 2011 to 2013, they poured more concrete in those 2 years than we did in the entire 20th century.
It's very important for you to state this one more time. They did more in 2 years of pouring concrete, I remember the stat, than U.S. did in 114 years.
Yes.
Is that a factual statement?
That's a factual statement.
I'm gonna find it, and let's put because if that is true, in 2 years versus 114, what was that all about when you talk about that? They're building 90 to 120 cities with the average population of 5 to 10 million, and one of the cities becoming the Silicon Valley. It's like by a lake, but they won't give the name of what the city's name is going to be, and it's got 550 square feet of office space, but 95% is not occupant, and they're willing to sell it for cheap and rent it for cheap. Like, is that really part of the strategy?
If you want to keep people employed, and you have one model, and you're facing a financial challenge, then you go back to the model. It's just like if it's working, don't make it quit. The problem that they run into is, can they get the raw materials and the energy and the food to actually sustain that? And what they've needed to do that is to get U.S. dollars, and we've enabled them through our trading relationship with them to do that. Recently with the tariffs, they've had to dip into the capital markets and get through MSCI, get money from our retirement funds. But for the most part, it keeps people employed. And that, by the way, is also why the Belt and Road Initiative exists. It's not just an opportunity to really gain control of the Eurasian landmass. It's also an ability to offload some of its spare capacity in order to employ Chinese. They harvest most of the world's frozen fish right? They export 50% of their catch, right? And there's 1 million people employed in the frozen fish industry, right?
that.
So it's all about keeping people employed, and so while they dominate these industries, it's not because not merely because they want to dominate the industry. It's because they want to maintain legitimacy. The way you maintain legitimacy is keep people employed.
90 to 120 cities with a population of 5 to 10 million? That's nuts to me. To be able to build something like that.
Well, think about it. If you're going to build a city, though, the best way to build a city is to build it a total greenfield, right? If you're building a city, or if you're increasing the size of a city, say like Shanghai, it's far more expensive than it is just to go out in the middle of a field and build a city, right? You don't have to do you don't have to tear down and rebuild and rezone and go through all the things. You just build a city. And I think if you think about how they financed it with our recovery money, a lot of the loans came from U.S. banks with recovery money, and the price of those things collapsed, as I talk about in the book. Now you have an ability to move the extra 300 or 400 million of people that are out in the country into those cities.
I mean, that's a very
It's brilliant.
Brilliant formula. Absolutely. What's the motive behind not allowing you to foreclose on your home? Like if you have a $100,000 loan on your home, you're late $4,000. They don't foreclose on the home. They just add the $4,000 that you're late on the loan. Now it's $104,000. Is that actually the banking system?
It's brilliant.
Is that really what they do?
Yes, it's brilliant.
You're serious? So
Yes.
that is a real actual methodology for them?
Right.
Did you understand that part? Like, so you got a $100,000 loan. I'm going through crisis. I miss a couple payments. I still stay in the home. They just tack it on the loan at the end.
Oh, you're not even in the home. You probably got 4 or 5 of these things.
Do you think that's a good formula, though?
Good formula for what?
For any other person, any other banking system to use?
Well, but when you have a strict capital controls and a
Nationalized-
non-convertible currency, you have essentially a closed financial system. These banks can't get their money out.
So you can keep doing that.
You can keep doing it.
That's just unbelievable.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. So if
If we were doing that,
Yeah.
dollars would be flowing out of this country.
Well, let me ask you. You know how the whole saying goes that if you got somebody that's coming up and they're competing with you, beat them while they're small. Don't let them get too big, right?
Right.
It's too late.
Well-
What I mean is beating them because, okay, let's transition into 5G. Let's talk
Right.
about 5G because this whole thing when I think Trump tweeted out something in 2014 and he said, remember, China is not our friends or not our ally. And he got like 300 retweets. It wasn't something big. He tweeted this back in 2014 or 2015. And then all of a sudden, one day, everybody in the news is talking about 5G. And prior to that day, we weren't really talking about it. And all of a sudden, hey, we got to be the leader in 5G. I'm like, 5G? So I'm going to start looking 5G. Okay, 1G, 2G, 3G. 1G is the regular phone back in the days. 2G is whatever. 3G is the iPhone, and then 4G is the latest phone. And then now 5G is going to be changing the game. And most people go to, 5G is just a faster phone, right? Because that's
Right.
what initially, we've always seen the G linked to a phone. Oh my gosh, I can download a movie in 3.6 seconds now on Netflix, a 2-hour movie, where before it was 3 minutes or 6 minutes, whatever, right? When you think about 5G, what do you think about of 5G and the capabilities and what it can really do to whoever that has access to it?
That's a good question. So if you go back to 2007 when the iPhone came out.
2007.
The top 5 in market cap were AT&T, General Electric, Microsoft, ExxonMobil, and Shell. Right? The phone comes out in 2007. I had one, 3G network. It's not a very good experience. 4G network comes out. By the way, we're the second country in the world to build a 4G network. Now you've got something, right? So when Steve Ballmer laughed at Steve Jobs, said, we don't need one of those. When you took the platform, which was the iPhone, and you married it up to the 4G network, which was the pipe for data, and it was a fast enough pipe, now you could create the apps, services, and business models that in 10 years led to the top 5 in market cap being Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and Microsoft, right? So the Chinese see this and they're like, the platform and the pipe. So the smartphone, this iPhone, which was the first one, then Android. So Apple and Google, right, dominate the mobile platform that the app services and business models of that economy are built on. Now look at the iPhone. It's a hardware, software, tightly integrated, closed-walled system like Steve Jobs liked, and the data was encrypted. Why was the data encrypted? Why did San Bernardino happen? Because Apple's an American company, right? They know you want privacy. They encrypt their phone. So now you've got the platform, and Android also went on to encrypt their platform. So both encrypted, right? So private devices. Take the cloud away from it. Just look at the device itself.
Sure.
It's meant to be a private device.
Right.
Why? It's American product. Fast forward, to 2009. China starts to look at that. Says, okay, we want to dominate the next level, right? Not just the technology. We want the apps, services, and business models to be Chinese companies. And so Huawei gets hundreds of billions of dollars to develop 5G and ZTE. But then you have Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. So they're behind the Chinese firewall. They're protected. You can't have the fangs going in there. It's just the bats that control the e-economy within China. And then you start, at the same time you're developing 5G, right, the platform, and I'll get to that in a second, but you're also developing Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. So now when you walk into, and you're starting to see the emergence of the 5G world in China. So you walk into a restaurant after you've ordered your food, and a camera picks you up, and you say, hey, David, welcome, here's your food, right? So you're starting to get the feel of what a 5G world is. And what is a 5G world? The platform is the network. So this is mobile computing paired with a pipe. 5G is computing and networking combined on the same platform. So this goes away. You walk outside your door and you say Uber. You don't get on your phone and say, I want an Uber. You just say Uber. Camera picks up your face or a microphone picks up you.
Come on.
That's what 5G is. That's what 5G is. And then the Uber shows up. There's a camera on the car that sees you, knows who you are, don't have to ask you your name. You get in and you go to wherever you want. You get out and you go do whatever you want. So in this world, in the 4G world, this is a platform. It's yours, right? You don't want to be part of that, all of that data. Remember we just talked about how do you influence society? You don't want all that data to be out there about what you're doing. Just don't carry one of these, right? Just opt out. In a 5G world, you cannot opt out. Who owns the data? This, you could conceivably say, you lease the data on here you own. If you're getting Google services, you don't own that data. But in the 5G world, not only can you not opt out because it's built around the city, it's not in your phone anymore. Not only can you not opt out, you don't know who owns the data. Everything that you do can be watched. And for every person by 2022, there's going to be, there's 2 cameras for every person. There's two people for every camera in China by 2022.
They have 1 billion right now on surveillance.
Right,
A billion cameras in China right now.
With artificial intelligence for facial recognition, right? So all of this is getting built right now in China. And who's helping them do it? Microsoft, Google, right? All of these companies that want to deploy this world into our country. So Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, that's where the world goes. It goes from 2007, AT&T, GE, and Microsoft to the FANGs to the BATs, right? Who owns the pipes? Me as a B2 guy, the first thing I look at in the country is where's the telecommunications? You've got to take that out, number one. But if rather instead of taking it out, you own or control it, so Huawei builds the pipes, then because you're behind the Great Firewall, you've built the app services and business models of the 5G world. And you're, like I said, you're already starting to see that. You know, where your facial recognition is built into your interaction when you go into a restaurant or when you go into a store or when you go into a bank. You know, everything's about, you know, the device is connected. Then as you build the network, then those proliferate. So 4G network, 10,000 devices per square mile. 5G network, 3 million devices per square mile. You're not going to carry 12 smartphones. You may not even carry a smartphone.
10,000 to 3 million?
10,000 to 3 million. That's what 5G does. The connectivity explodes, right? So that allows you to put devices literally everywhere that can make your life more convenient, or can track you. There's a bike in DC, it's called Mobike. Have you seen these things? They're silver and orange. Look out for them next time you're in DC. They're silver and orange, called Mobike. They had them when I was in 2016 when I get to Beijing. You take your phone, and by the way, I took a phone, right, a phone that I threw away when I got home, and I had said,
You threw it away when you got home.
I threw it away when I got home. Load all the apps on it that a Chinese person has so I can understand what they do. You never have to carry a wallet. You never have to carry a key. It's all done on your phone. You can pay anybody, anywhere for anything, and they do. 900 people are on WeChat, and they spend 90% of their time in app doing things, or ordering airline tickets, buying food, whatever you want. You can have anything you want.
900 people or 900 million?
900 million people. Okay, so let me explain to you how effective what they built is. I have one of the guys working for me on one of these Mobikes. Now, the Mobike it's just parked there in the street with a lock on it. You go over, you hit a QR code on your phone, it unlocks the bike, you get on it, you ride it, and you lock the bike. Okay, so where does that data go? They know it's you. You got on that bike, you went 2 locations, okay, or you went to a location, so that data is available. So I have one of my guys, he gets on a Mobike, rides somewhere, has his iPad in the basket, gets off the bike, comes back to the embassy, and realizes, I forgot my iPad. Goes into the regional security office and says, I forgot my iPad and my bike. Calls a local public security bureau, and those guys call the guy that's got his iPad on his phone, on his cell phone, and say, can you bring the iPad back to the embassy? That's how wired Beijing is right now.
So if I'm, and by the way, I heard about self-regulating brake pads, self-regulating. Is that really the case? Like your brake pads are going to be fixing them?
Everything. There is the very high speed, low latency things like if you need a surgeon in Dallas to perform surgery on somebody that's 60 miles away, he can do that from his office in Dallas, and you can have a robot, in 60 miles away, doing the surgery. It's called the tactile internet. That's coming. That's part of this fabric. In addition to this kind of low power thing like you're talking about that just sends a signal, hey, I've got somebody passed by this location, or I need to change a brake pad. All of that is built into the 5G network. So it really becomes a network of machines, not a network of people. But more importantly, there is terabytes and terabytes of data that's created about you, and you have no control over it. And the people that do have control over it are the large tech companies, and increasingly, because 5G, not just Huawei builds a network, but the 3GPP standards, which is the industry standard making body, has been dominated by China. And so not only the standards have been dominated by China, the underlying patents for the technology of 5G have been dominated by China. So even if you're not building Huawei, you're still building Chinese technology into your network. So you have Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei, you have the technology, and you have the app services and business models. You have everything you need, right? So you used to have Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google dominant. As those other companies become dominant because they've created the 5G world, now you're going to see the ability for China to deploy control literally everywhere.
So why would we want that technology? Why would we want that technology in the US?
Precisely. Which is what the fight about Huawei is. But I took it a step further. I say, even if you're building Ericsson, Nokia, or Samsung, because China dominates the standards and the technology, you're still building a lot of their technology into your network. So rather than doing that, build a military-grade network and deploy that for the people. Give them access to the same type of protections that we give our military access to, because we don't want their data to be spied on.
So for me, I look at it from this standpoint, because then I'll give the other side of the argument. I'm curious to know what you'll say about it, because the whole Made in China 2025, and you read the article and you kind of look at the stats and you see how Droid is from where? The operating system is from South Korea, I believe, right? It's Samsung is from South Korea. Apple iPhone is from US, and then you have Huawei, NZT, all these guys are from NTZ, I think, is it called, right? Is that what it's called?
ZTE?
ZTE. ZTE is what it's called. And ZTE is Limitless with Bradley Cooper. My brain went to a whole different place. So you have Huawei from China that they're making this phone, right? Okay. On the 5G side, if I'm looking at this, okay, They're saying China's going to be ready to deploy 5G 2020. And everywhere else, they're not going to be ready till 2025. China's ready 2020. We're not ready till 2025. How much of a penetration in the marketplace can China get having access to 5G 5 years before us to get it going versus us not having access? Because Qualcomm, everybody, you talk to them, no, we're not ready till 2025. We're not ready till 25. How much of a negative impact is it going to have on countries outside of China, the fact that they're starting in 2020 and most of us want till 2025?
Well, I think they've signed up something like 90 countries to deploy.
I saw 57, but maybe it's 90 countries now.
It's moved towards more.
Except U.S., by the way.
Except the United States and Australia.
Yeah.
Everybody else is, there's some hemming and hawing them. There's some, of course, saying no. But essentially, they have the lead. This was an industrial strategy on the part of China. It's really about seeing the future, and this is what I give them credit for. When in my book, I call it a beautiful strategy because I think it is the most incredibly well thought strategy that I've ever seen. And it probably will go down in history as one of the greats. And it is smart for them to figure this out.
But even if we have it, would we use it? We probably wouldn't use it even if we have it anyways, right?
I think I would be terrified to have, to use it. And I think, the good thing that we have is that our telcos here are so burdened with debt that they're slow to deploy 5G anyway.
But if we got it, let's just say we have access to it, okay? Would the voters vote for it to be deployed? Because if you need 2 cameras per, let's just say, because you need that technology as well. It's not like day one we have it, hey, we got it, let's have the server, we go use 5G, turn it on, it's a switch. It's a lot of development for us to be ready with the camera, with all that technology to be created. And they're saying there's some threats to it as well with health. It may not be even healthy for you to have 5G.
Yeah, but our guys are over there working with the Chinese right now building it. Right? They're helping them design the algorithms. They're helping to design a lot of the technology because they've moved a lot of their design facilities over there because there's so much data. And you can go to Baidu and say, I just need tons of data so that I can run, work on my algorithms. So, it's not like they're not already working with the Chinese. Our companies are working with them to build this stuff.
Do you think a form of Trump's negotiation with tariffs is a way for him to expect them to give access to 5G where I'm not negotiating with you until you put that to us and help us speed up the process as well, or no? You don't think that's one of Trump's...
So again, let's just go back to what 5G is. It's beamforming antennas with software-defined radios and software-defined networks. We've been working with that stuff in the U.S. military for years. We have the technology. We don't have to go to China. China doesn't necessarily have all the best technology. It's just we have all this technology we haven't commercialized. So we just need to turn around and put it out ourselves.
Then why are they saying that we can't do it till 2025?
Because the companies that do it, the equipment manufacturers, we don't have any more. We don't have any commercial equipment manufacturers. We have companies that work with the Defense Department. We don't have any that build for commercial telecoms. Now, Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung, they still build equipment. But again, as I said, they're so in partnered with China, except for Samsung, which pulled out for device manufacturing 3 or 4 years ago, but not equipment manufacturing. They're also corrupt, or not corrupt, but essentially having Chinese technology built into their systems.
I got a couple more questions here and we should be done. Next thing is with Nixon. A lot of times and I like the fact that you mentioned Nixon in the book with Kissinger. A lot of times people give credit to Nixon for what he did with China. Even Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Nixon opened it up, right? And then there's a part you talk about at the time, I think it was Mao, who is the leader of China at the time, and he's sitting with Kissinger, and there's the interpreter that says, hey, they're having a conversation, and he says to him a certain phrase.
Yeah, the ba.
And the interpreter, what was that all about?
Well, I think, again, it goes to the premise of the book. There is obfuscation built into everything they do, and even when you do negotiations with them, by the way, say you're looking at an English document, and then there's a Chinese translation right next to it that you're looking at both documents. Oftentimes, what they'll do is we'll negotiate a document in English, and then they'll change the word in Chinese, right? So in a lot of ways, China uses that language barrier as it's almost like the first layer of encryption. And so since, many Americans have really no clue about the Chinese language. It's very difficult for them to have access to. And so it actually is good for the Chinese because it allows them to obfuscate things. And then what they'll do is they'll make translations in negotiations where they use one word, and sometimes our translators will catch it, sometimes they won't.
Really? Sometimes our translators don't catch it.
Don't catch it.
So in that statement is what? America is the leader. What he really meant to say is America is the tyrant.
Right.
Is what he meant. Because he looked at America as the similar to Hitler's regime. It's the same way he looked at it. So,
and they'll say, well, we didn't want to offend. Well, perhaps, or, perhaps something else was intended there.
Is the interpreter trying to save the person making a statement? Is it like, because that just means that the interpreter is making the decision for the leader. You know what I'm saying?
I've seen these before where the interpreter is trying to make a judgment call on how to interpret.
Yeah, I mean, I remember
when there's not a clear interpretation.
Yeah, Mike Wallace goes to Iran, sits with Khomeini, and tells him, hey, a certain question, the interpreter says, I can't ask him that question. He says, I think it's a fair question, ask him. And then when he asked the question, he got up and walked out. So I've seen that before as well. So what are we going to see moving forward? Because with China, you talk about the fact that China came in and said, hey, we're going to help you out, Africa. We're going to put $60 to $80 billion into Africa. And, they're deep into U.S. Educational system now. Out of our, I think, 1,020,000 students, 32.5% of the students, something like that, 32.5% of our students in U.S., the international students that are here, are from China. Right? So they're coming in, they're going into NYU, they're going to all these schools, they're essentially bringing a bunch of business to these universities. So are they going so deep in these different organizations where people are forced to support them due to the money and the power they're bringing in, and then all of a sudden they're going to be the same empire they were for 5,000 years? Are you kind of seeing that?
That's exactly what's happening, and it really is it's a smart strategy because we spend $800 billion on defense, and Greece basically makes a deal with the Port of Piraeus, and so we say, well, things aren't working. We're going to build a couple more carrier battle groups, and Greece says, I don't really care. What I want is jobs for my people. What I want is money. And that's what China comes in and says, okay, we'll give you money.
Very cool. Not very cool. It's good to know that part because I just don't think these guys are going to slow down. I think they're, you haven't met people where they say, oh, I'm really not that competitive.
They're the most dangerous.
I just want to do good for, and I'm just a very, I go to church on Sundays and I'm just, I love my family and we're just trying to be good citizens. And then deep down inside, they're like wanting to whoop your ass. Like back in school, did you study for the test? No, not really. I mean, I don't know how it's going to be. I'm a little bit worried, but we'll see. And then again, 98, you're like, wait a minute, you were studying freaking for 2 weeks for this test, right? I'm the one that was partying, you were the one that was studying for the test. Anyways, last thing here, speed round. I'll give you a name. You give me the first thing that comes to your mind, and then we'll go from there. Mitch McConnell.
I think he's an establishment.
Establishment. Okay, Dalai Lama.
Dissident leader.
Trump.
Not the establishment.
Got it. Ren Zhengfei.
PLA.
PLA, okay. Again, excuse my pronunciation. Xi Jinping.
Communist Party.
Okay. Joe Biden.
Establishment.
John Bolton.
Establishment.
Really? Okay. Hunter Biden.
The child of the establishment.
Okay. Jack Ma.
PLA.
Boris Johnson.
I think I don't know if he's establishment or not.
Okay.
I think the jury's
Verdict's
still out.
Yeah, okay, jury's still out there. Roger Robinson Jr.
I think he's a freedom fighter.
Freedom fighter, okay. And then the American Constitution.
Absolutely necessary.
Absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary. It's funny you say that. American Constitution is absolutely necessary. One of the things that I was debating, another very, very established multi-billionaire, we were talking about China. And one of the things that came up, I said, believe it or not, I believe one of the strengths China has is they don't have freedom of speech. And what does that mean? They don't have freedom of press. I went online and I looked at China's unemployment, 3.4%, 2.8%, 3%, 3.1% for the last 20 years. How do I know that? And then you look at real numbers like 15, 20%. How do I know these numbers, right? And US, you know, some may hate CNN, some may hate Fox, some may hate MSNBC, some may hate Drudge, some may hate these guys. But at least they're going back and forth, allowing us to kind of watch them go back and forth and then say, let me go do my own research to kind of figure out. So as much as free press is annoying here, it's annoying to the opposite group. I'm sure folks at MSNBC can't stand folks at Fox, vice versa. It's amazing how much that allows us to kind of decipher from all the, propaganda that's being sold and then kind of go out there and say, okay, this is what I see. So I agree with you on the American Constitution, extremely necessary. That's why I'm here from Iran and we escaped there to come here. Final thoughts here before we leave. Your thoughts. I am an investor. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an executive. I'm seeing what's going on with China. I'm watching this. I'm a little bit more educated. I'm about to order your book. I haven't ordered it. I'm going to click on the link, order it, and read the whole thing because obviously you can't get the 230 pages in a 2-hour sit down. What should I be thinking about and adapting or making certain audibles right now for my career to prepare myself for the next 12, 24, 60 months in the future?
I would pick up the Constitution. I would pick up the Atlanta Charter. I'd read those two things and I'd think about it because my campaign is about making sure that those things last. And if they last and you continue to do business in the way that you're doing, you're going to go broke.
If you continue to do business the way that you're going, you're going to go broke.
Because you can ignore me, you can get on my side, or you can fight me. But my goal is to preserve the Constitution. The way we do it is to preserve the way, the rules of the road that we created. And I'm about establishing those rules. And if you're doing business and you're making money from the Chinese Communist Party, and you think that that's the way that you're going to continue to make money going forward, if you think that this government is going to support that, I think you're 100% wrong. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that doesn't happen.
Fair enough. If you ever thought about being a motivational speaker, maybe it's not a good career for you, by the way, because that was a very direct statement, and I love it. It's my style of communication. I wanted to tell you, I had Mario and Kai get a gift for you guys. We are going to send you to China for 1 week for vacation to go have a great time. On us, it's on the house. You know, it may turn into 7 years, but we're going to start off with a week and then we'll see.
As long as it's like a 4-star hotel. Please don't send me one of those 2-star hotels. Those are really bad.
Anyways, having said that, General, thank you so much for coming out. Also, I know you came with your family here. Thank you for making the time to come out. It was a pleasure sitting down and talking with you, Valuetainers. There are books I read when I have guests that come out, and I read it to get as much information as I can. If you could see the amount of marks is in this book, I couldn't put this book down. It's a must read for anybody that's planning on competing in the marketplace. We're going to put the link below. Go order the book, and any of the topics that he talked about, links, anything that he may have mentioned. If we find the links, we'll put the link below as well. But make sure you go order this book. Having said that, General, thank you for coming out. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yes, this was great. You know, I actually want to hear your thoughts to see where your opinion was about US and China or 5G pre-watching this interview and post-watching Robert Spalding with his latest book that came out, Stealth War. So tweet me at Patrick Bidham and kind of let me know how you process today's sit-down, because this was very different for me as well to see it from a guy that's on the inside, national security, presenting 5G, who's lived in China, very different kind of an interview. So that's that. And by the way, if you watch this interview, you may like the interview I did with Ray Dalio as well, because it's somewhat about this topic, as well as a video I did on 5G and Huawei that's obviously about this topic as well. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please click on the button over here to subscribe. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.